for the webinar today is hashtag 5S and lean. Feel free to post insights using this hashtag. Also feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A capability. You'll see the button for this in the footer of your screen. We'll attempt to answer all questions today in the webinar, but if we aren't able to get to all of them, we'll follow up with you after the webinar with a document that includes all of the answers. We'll also ask some polling questions of the audience during the webinar, and we'll be sharing that data live during the webinar and discussing it. This session is being recorded and it will be sent to you following the presentation for your own purposes or to share with others. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. David Visco is a 5S expert. Beginning in 1985, David launched his career as a warehouse control manager running a distribution center that managed inventory of over $500 million in value. Using 5S in the workplace, he saw a unique opportunity and need for a 5S resource. And in 2006, he founded the 5S store, the first online store dedicated entirely to 5S. In 2015, David's first book, 5S Made Easy, was published. Today, in addition to his role at the 5S store, he frequently speaks publicly on the topic of 5S best practices. Scott Gauvin is the CEO of management consulting firm Macresco, and he's a seasoned change agent with over 25 years of experience successfully helping organizations realize their potential. Throughout his career, Scott's focus has been on driving performance gains through organizational alignment and a progressive approach to operations strategy. He has advised companies the world over across a wide range of industries. Scott holds a BA from the University of Massachusetts and an MBA from Boston University, and he's a Six Sigma Black Belt. He's also a frequent speaker and has presented for the American Society of Quality, the Shingo Conference, the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, FabTech, and others. We welcome both of today's speakers. I'm your moderator, Mary Beth, and I'll be leading our discussion today, as well as taking questions from the audience throughout the webinar. As you know, we will be handling your questions today, but as these roll in, I'd like to get us started with some of the topics that we promised that we'd cover today. So let me start by asking, should companies use 5S or lean or both? Scott, this one's for you.
All right, thank you, Mary Beth. And thank you, David, for inviting me here. This is such a treat. So to answer your question, should companies use 5S or lean or both together? Thinking about that question, if I step back for a second, lean manufacturing was really formulated from observations that were taken from the Toyota production system back in the 80s. The value of the Toyota production system, or what's called TPS, is really in the way that it integrates continuous improvement methods with its culture and the emphasis that it puts on the respect for people. Lean is a management methodology that derived from that Toyota production system as an attempt to replicate some of the continuous improvement aspects of TPS. The directives for most lean attempts, at least from what I've observed, has traditionally been to focus on the elimination of waste, reduction of cost, improving quality, or more generally, just trying to do more with less. In some cases, it's been an attempt to go through the lean tool set almost as a checklist and then claim that you're lean. 5S is one of the tools or one of the methods in the lean arsenal that is often deployed to address the waste of this organization. And in some cases, it includes safety. But I think it's important to note, however, that just because you're following a 5S process or the slides or some 5S agenda that you've gotten out of a book doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing lean. I believe that the purpose of lean or continuous improvement really more broadly is to change perspectives about how you deliver value and engage the people in the process or engage the stakeholders. So at its core, I think lean is really an approach to create a cultural transformation in the ways that we interact, the ways that we communicate, and in the ways that we create and deliver value to the customers and to the other stakeholders or to each other. But to change culture, you need behavior change, which requires a mindset shift, which ultimately requires a change in habits. And 5S is a great step in that transformation process of thinking about waste differently, seeing it differently, developing some new habits that can then begin that cultural transformation. So you certainly could use 5S alone without the context of lean. And you probably do this when you do your spring cleaning every year. You do the first 3 S's really well. The real benefit is when 5S is used as a cultural enabler in a lean journey to partner with the employees, leveraging their experience, their knowledge, and their wisdom. So.
Thanks for that, Scott. So I think right now we're going to tee up our first polling question for the audience. And there it is. So which of the following lean tools do you use? So please, at this point, select all that apply. And it will leave it open for a few moments for our audience to complete this question. Great, let's get those last answers in, and then we will put the results up on the screen. And there's our responses. This is scrollable, by the way. So if you mouse over what is popped up on your screen, you'll be able to scroll up and down and see the responses with your own eyes. But you can see there is an overwhelming usage of 5S as the #1 tool that's being used by this audience group, followed by value stream mapping, Kanban, and others. So interesting stuff. That said, I'm going to kick this one over to David and ask, what are some specific ways that 5S supports lean?
Okay. Thanks, Mary Beth. And thanks again for joining us today, everybody. And Scott, thanks for being on board. Gotta love that polling answer though, huh? The 5S top of the list. That kind of goes to what Scott had mentioned too, that a lot of folks will just do 5S and they'll end it there. And they'll even consider themselves lean, which it isn't, but that's a discussion for another webinar. But anyway, as far as how 5S supports lean, it's not about the tape. It's not about the red tags. It's not about the posters. It's really about enabling the workforce, right? I'll give you an example. So I was at a company, a client, whereby I was doing an assessment. I'm walking around and I'm like, where are all your 5S supplies? Like, oh, well, we have them way down there. I'm like, oh, okay, show them to me. So we went there, get in the room. I'm like, well, where are they? Well, they're locked in the closet. Like, locked in the closet? And then I said, okay, well, let's open the closet. We open the closet. And I'm like, where are the supplies? They're in the cabinet, locked. So I'm like, what are you doing? So that goes completely against the idea of lean and 5S, and they're in place to enable the workforce. So I beg these folks to please get the supplies out of there. Some people lock them up because they're scared people are going to walk off with them, whatnot. I mean, seriously, there isn't a big market for that stuff out on eBay. So it's like, we want people using them. We want to enable people to make improvements, and making it as easy as possible is key. And that all goes in with lean, changing behaviors, allowing people to do what they want to do to make improvements to help themselves, right? To make their day easier. And also 5S helps create stability. So you put the standards in place and whatnot, and you keep trying to improve them, but over time you get more and more stable and people feel more and more comfortable with making changes and coming forth with ideas. And a big part of lean is open communication, right? Everybody feeling safe, being able to talk about how to improve. And 5S will do that if it's done right. So, that's what I have there as far as how 5S supports lean.
Great. Thanks, David.
Yep.
Scott, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, you mentioned it's a great way to get the employees engaged, and especially early on in the process of trying to become a leaner company. The whole principle is around engaging people and leveraging the people that you have and leveraging their experience, and what they know and what they can bring, and using not just their hands, but using their head and their hearts in the process. And 5S is a really great way to begin that engagement process. And the thing I love about it, you mentioned, part of lean is the willingness to make mistakes. And you can make a lot of mistakes with the 5S, and they're really easy to correct, but it's a great way to begin that experimentation process. So I think 5S is a great way to kind of get the lean process kicked off.
Thanks. So if that's true, I guess it could be said that getting the basics of 5S is really important. So for our next question, what are the key things to focus on in order to get 5S basics right, David?
Get them right. Well, you absolutely have to have open communication with everybody. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Like I mentioned earlier, that it's safe to speak up, safe to exchange ideas. There's various ways of doing that, of course. You can have, like I like to have the topic of 5S brought up during stand-up meetings, for example. Like we have a daily huddle every morning on the manufacturing floor and whatnot, and you want to make sure 5S is a topic of discussion. It should be in your staff meetings as well. And I even propose that they could be part of reviews, performance reviews, make sure people are being held accountable for that. Folks need to remember that 5S is all about continuous improvement, right? So we're never going to be perfect, and the goal is never to get perfect because you just can't. It's unsustainable, but to always be trying to improve and always getting better, and it's okay to trip up. So the foundation for lean is about enabling people and supporting change that's necessary. So if you're going to do 5S audits, which some companies do, some don't, those audits need to be used as a learning opportunity as opposed to a slap on the wrist. We've talked about this before. It should be about communication, which is what I said in the very beginning. How can we improve these things? And if you're going to do audits, make it, not that there's somebody marching down the aisle and you can hear them coming, with a clipboard and whatever, and they come in, zoom in, and then they leave. That's not the way to do it. And Scott and I have probably seen that a million times on our own. We're like, oh, it's not the way to do it. We're all here to try to improve. So let's do these audits when we're going to do them and make sure it's just an opportunity to talk and to continue to improve. But the key is for folks to listen. Listening it's such an important skill. Ask questions, listen, improve from there, come up with ideas and work on it as a team.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. So I think we're ready for our next polling question. So let's get that polling question popped up on the screen so you guys can answer. The question is, on a 1 to 10 scale, how engaged are your employees around your 5S initiative, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest? Participants can take a moment to answer that question. Again, the question is on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 is not at all and 10 is very enthusiastic. How engaged are your employees around your 5S initiative? And we'll take a few moments for the audience to consider and fill in their responses, and then we'll pop that up on the screen. And it looks like we've got our answers here. So if you look at the distribution of responses here, it looks like there are clusters. There's a cluster around 3 and 4 here, which is on the lower end of the spectrum. So I'd be interested in hearing, I'll start with you, Scott. What are your thoughts about this response?
Yeah, I'm not surprised seeing this, that it's so low. It's unfortunate, and I think that goes to, again, what's the purpose? What is it that we're trying to do with 5S? And if it's really to just clean up the area, then you're completely missing a huge amount of opportunity, because I think the byproduct of doing 5S is that you get a clean, organized space. I think really, for me, the number one thing when I'm doing a 5S event, or when I'm engaging with a company to do a 5S event, the number one thing for me is identifying and committing to some new habits. Because if lean is really about helping create that cultural transformation, again, in order to change culture, you've got to change mindsets and behaviors. And in order to change behaviors, you've got to create new habits. So I'm really focused on what are the new habits that we need to create. And so one of the things that I do before a 5S workshop is I try to spend some time really understanding why people are working in the environments the way they are. Because one of the things that I often say is that all behavior is an expression of a need unmet. And that's because we all do what we do for some reason. Most of our actions are not random. There's a reason why we do what we do. And so there's a reason why the area is organized or not. And it's the way it is organized or not. There's a reason for that. So just changing it without addressing the underlying needs isn't going to lead to a sustainable change. And then people can start to feel resentful, and you lose engagement very quickly as a result of that. And I think that's kind of what this is suggesting here, that, we don't have that level of engagement because, what is in it for me? Why would I do this when I know that I'm going to get this audit and I'm going to get this slap later that I didn't have that in the square that it was supposed to be in? And that's not what the intention of 5S is. It's really there to help you create a new way of thinking and and develop that new habit to sustain the change. And I think that, if we do that right, that you can get people excited about it, because, really 5S is, that activity should be about benefiting them in some way, because who wants to work in a dirty, disorganized area? This is really about, how do you want this area to look like? What would you like the area to be? And the thing with the habit is, it takes 20 days to make a habit, a routine, but it takes 66 days for the habit to become unconscious. So it's not something that's going to happen, on day 3 of the event. It's something that has to be, and you have to continue that engagement for months before you're going to get that sustainability.
Yep.
That's helpful. So one of the things that I noticed about the distribution of responses is it's a bimodal distribution. So we had a small cluster of folks that that said a 7 or 8 rating, which is higher up on the spectrum. So for those folks that answered higher up on the spectrum, I implore you to actually submit to us via the Q&A function what you think is going well at your companies, and perhaps we can talk with David and Scott about that a little bit. So if you're one of those people who answered 7 or 8 on that spectrum, I would love to hear from you why you think your team is so engaged. Meanwhile, I'm going to turn it over to David and ask you, is this what you normally see with clients, is that they're really challenged around their employee engagement? Do you think this is a typical response?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, not surprised at all. And there's a host of reasons that we've currently mentioned. One of those is lack of proper management buy-in. So one, it always goes up to the corner office and whether or not they're truly on board and they really understand the whole purpose of lean and 5S in the first place. And a lot of times, like Scott was saying, people miss that mark. They don't really get it. But what'll happen is somebody will get wind of 5S or lean and think it's a thing to do, and they'll kind of, it's a recipe of the month and whatnot, and they'll chase it through their groups for a few months or whatever, and then they just let it slide. And over time, what happens is people just get fed up and they're like, oh, okay, this is something else new that we're going to get on board with for a little while, and then it'll go away. So what I've talked about in the past is it's really important for the supervisors and the group leads to hold their folks accountable, at least, so that they will be engaged. If those group leads aren't holding folks accountable, then those people aren't going to get engaged if they don't see the value in it. And then, it just falls in these lower numbers. Like you see people like, well, why should I bother? I've got other stuff to do. Nobody's holding my hand, or nobody's holding this over me that I'm not doing what I should be doing. So I'm not going to bother. And happens all the time.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to turn this one back to Scott. I'd like to get back to talking about how 5S and Lean sort of work together. So how did the 5S basics give you a head start on Lean? In what specific areas?
Yeah, so again, my focus for when I'm doing Lean, my focus is to change the way people think, because it's really fundamentally for me about changing the culture. And so I'm really thinking about how do we need to think differently to improve either the process, the area, or the working conditions in some case. And so for me, it keeps coming back to what is the underlying need. And so if there's a need that, they say, well, I've got all these extra components here, and so I need a place to put them. We start asking, well, why do you have those extra needs? And what you'll often find is that they're coming to a just in case. Well, I need this just in case, or I need that just in case, or I need this just in case. And whenever you hear that someone say just in case, you know that there's something broken there, because what is actually driving the just in case is what is one of the things that you've got to sort out. And so I really use 5S as a way to start flushing out what are some of the underlying issues that people are having that are more systemic in the grander process, or in the larger part of the business, that are going to lead me down other paths of improvements that we need to make. Because when you start doing 5S, you start flushing out all of those just in cases. And those just in cases are there either because of policy, are there because of a broken process, are there because of broken communication. As David said, maybe there's broken accountability. And so you can really utilize 5S if you are doing it more than just to clean up the area, but you're doing it as kind of a way to uncover the root of some of the issues. It's a great way to start flushing that out in a way that is non-threatening, because you don't want to go in and change someone's area for them. You want to engage them in the change and really have a conversation around how would you envision this area? If we could redo it from scratch, what would it look like for you? What would your ideal state be? And then you work towards that ideal state for them. So that's one of the ways that I like to use 5S as part of the whole Lean kind of effort.
Well, Scott, that's very aligned with what I'm hearing from the audience. So we did have a couple of the folks that rated the engagement highly send in responses about what they're doing. And I'd like to read those for our audience. So the first one says, after a half day of training on the history of Lean and 5S, we run a brainstorming session for the areas with the group who will be working in that area, as well as the group who doesn't work in that area. A fresh set of eyes and different ideas are brought up, and we keep repeating that the 5S event is about them. So I'd love to get a response from David and Scott about that approach. Scott, I'll start with you since you spoke last, and then we'll turn it over to David.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, and in fact, it's a great technique because that really begins to give you that punch list of things to go look for. And and it's like we all have, again, all behavior is an expression of a need unmet. I'm going to engage if I think my needs are going to be met. And one of the things that this group is doing is identifying what are the unmet needs, and then actively pursuing to say, hey, how can we address some of those needs? And I think this is a great approach.
David, anything from you?
Yeah, I love that approach too, just because it goes to that whole having an open communication, right? People feel comfortable talking and giving ideas and moving forward. So it's great. That's super.
And our next response from the audience says, I think the employee engagement in our organization is a direct result of a parallel effort of team training and line leading training, which includes recognition of improvement ideas, management training, and problem solving sessions, audits and accountability of managers to remove obstacles. So David, since you spoke last, what do you think of that approach?
Yeah, you pretty much checked off all the boxes there as far as I can tell. So that's pretty good. I mean, what I heard in there was management's involved, which is really good. So I think he's right on. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, and and I think sometimes you might have a leader who says, yeah, I know intellectually I need to do this, but then how involved they get sometimes can be sparse, and the more the leaders can be involved, because the more that they're going to set the tone and set the example. But one of the things that I think this person said was, I forget exactly how they phrased it, but something about recognizing the improvements. And and that's one of the tenets of the whole respect for people piece, is having so recognizing people's contributions, recognizing their efforts, and then also, in addition to just recognizing, but showing some appreciation for their contribution and their efforts and their ideas that they're bringing forward. And if they bring an idea forward and it just goes into a box that never gets addressed and never gets talked about, that's not showing recognition, that's not showing appreciation. And so and it's okay. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that might come out that might not be able to be enacted on, and that's okay. You can bring the idea up, say, hey, listen, here's an idea, it's a good idea, but just where we're at in the process, where we're at with our resources, where we're at with what we've got available to us, this isn't something we can act on now, but it's something maybe we can come back and revisit in a year from now. And that, just being able to do that is often validation enough for people to continue to engage and contribute.
So I have another question from the audience here, and it asks about the cultural standpoint, and would like to hear a little bit more about the cultural aspects. Can you tell us more about that? So Scott, I'll let you keep going since you just touched on that a bit.
Yeah, so for me, when I do a 5S event, the very first module that I present to the group is called the mindset and culture. And it's really to say, okay, what is the culture of our organization? And in some cases, what is the culture that we want? And how do we start to get there? And what are some of the parts and pieces that we need to get there to create that kind of culture? And so if we can start to develop those cultural elements, and it may be just the way we communicate, it may be the way we treat each other, it may be the way we look at problems. Some organizations look at problems as things that if you're bringing up problems, then you're a problem. As opposed to some organizations look at problems as like opportunities. And so what are the cultural elements that you want to change within your organization, and begin doing that with that small subgroup as you're doing the 5S event. So incorporating those cultural elements and making them front and center. I mentioned earlier, a large focus for my 5S efforts is around creating habits, because I believe that the sustainment piece is really about the habit creation and development. And I do that with the team. Once we've got an area where we think we want it, we then sit down and say, okay, so what are the habits that we need to have in order to maintain this? And we develop a list of those habits. And then we put together a process by which we check on those habits. Are those habits being done every day? As opposed to maybe an audit where you're checking to make sure that the pencil sharpener is in the square that it's supposed to be in. We check on, are the habits actually being done every day? Because the more you reinforce those habits, again, it takes a while for those habits to get reinforced, as many as like 66 days. And so if every day we're talking about the 2 or 3 or 4 habits, once those habits become unconscious, then you move on to the next set of habits, and it's an iterative thing. So 5S isn't a one-time event. 5S should be iterative. And if you're iterating and you're creating new habits every time you're iterating, you by nature are changing the culture.
It sounds to me like you're treating the habits as sort of an input into an output, and you're measuring the inputs.
Exactly.
Very Six Sigma like.
Yeah. Well,
For sure.
blacked out. I can't help myself.
I know. Well, I nerd out on that stuff too. So, David, what are your thoughts from a cultural standpoint? Like, what have you seen done well around, let's stick to 5S, around 5S that has really brought in the cultural aspect and helped to shift things for companies?
I've seen, it's funny, when you go to an area and people are on board with 5S, you can feel it, people are happy to talk about it. So if you just walk through an area and you're just talking to people, they glow, they get all excited. They're like, oh yeah, let me show you what I did. And look at how this has helped improve us and this and that. And people get all energized, and then you go to other areas, other companies and whatnot, like I was talking about earlier, where they dread the audit coming, and the culture is completely different. You go to talk to folks about what they've done and whatever, and it's very macabre and quiet and whatnot. So what I've seen is when everybody is on board and the culture is really cranking in the right way, and everybody's feeling it, and they're all just trying to do the right thing and improve, it's night and day compared to the other side. And 5S as a tool to get you there is a great way of doing it.
Yeah, I think what you're describing, David, is what I see as the difference between intrinsic engagement versus extrinsic engagement. When it's extrinsic, it's kind of forced on you. When it's intrinsic, there's a buy-in that people have, and it does create a completely different vibe and a completely different energy.
Well said.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David and Scott. And thanks to our viewers for your questions. I have a final slide to put up for you folks here. If you need the point of view of an expert, here are some resources that might be able to help you. So on the right-hand side are all the social sites for the 5S store. We publish all kinds of best practices stuff there. Of course, there's David's book, 5S Made Easy. There's a free online 5S best practices resource called 5S Blackboard that's available to you on the 5S store website under Learn on the menu. And here's the contact information for both David and Scott. If you would like to use it, feel free. And for any 5S supplies you may need, please visit us at the5sstore.com. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.